Was it live? Did it work? I'll restart. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar, Getting Started in Science, hosted by Youth Science Canada. My name is Kelty Murdoch. I am currently a UBC engineering student, and I was in science fairs from 2008 through to 2013. I'm joined here today by an excellent team of other Canada-wide Science Fair alumni, and we hope to be able to walk you through how to get started with science fairs and hopefully answer any questions you have about that. On that note, if you'd like to ask any questions, please do sign into the Google Plus account and then use the Q&A feature on this webinar. All right. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
All right, well, my name is Emily. I'm a biotechnologist. I am actually my first year of that program. I did science fair in 2010, 2011, as well as 2012.
Hi guys, my name is Jasmine. I'm a third-year biology student at Dalhousie University. I did my first Canada-wide science fair in 2011, 2012, and 2013.
Hi, I'm Farouk Salwani, and I'm a health sciences student at UMoncton in Moncton, and I participated in science fairs 2008, 11, 12, and 13.
Hi, my name's Kate Berger, and I'm in third year chemical biology at UBC. I did science fair in 2008, 2009, and then 2010 through 2013 with Jasmine Barr.
All right, thanks, guys. So our first question of the day is, what is a science fair?
Anybody want to go? All right, so I'll go. A science fair is a grouping of many students who have worked on very unique and different projects. Everybody there is somebody who has worked for a long time on a single idea and presents it. So it's a really great socializing event, and not only that, but it's a great competition if you want to take it as that as well. And yeah, that's my view on it. So anybody else?
I think it's a great opportunity to learn new things in an area you're interested in that you might not cover in a science class in school.
It's definitely an opportunity for you to use the things that you have learned in school and apply it outside of the classroom. And I had a great experience when I did my first science fair project. I got to work in areas which I would not have had the opportunity to in school.
And not only is it a great experience just in regards to science itself, but it's also a great way just to network with a bunch of people and also just meet a lot of great new people and friends that are interested in the same fields as you are.
So what do you think are the main reasons why a student should do a science fair? What are the main opportunities from science fair you feel?
A lot of the opportunities that I got through science fair was just, working in areas that I found interesting. It also opened me up to a lot more opportunities. I got to work with my friend who became my science fair partner, and I know that we had a great time.
Yeah, we got to work in a lab starting from a young age, which has been a great experience. Even now, it definitely gives you, I guess, like a leg up compared to other people for getting into opportunities now that I'm in university. And going to Canada-wide Science Fair was such an awesome opportunity to meet all these people from around Canada that have similar interests that you do, and to network with them and still be friends with them now. So.
I think for me, one of the main benefits of science fair was taking something that I was already interested in science class, but then applying it outside of the classroom, and then also there were lots of rewards. Like traveling for me is a big thing, and I got to travel a lot through my science fair experience. And I know it's not all about, the rewards you get from science fair, but if I was already doing the work for it, then science fairs were an exciting opportunity to also experience other things as well as the science.
And
Yeah,
it's a great idea if you want to continue on in the field that you're doing your science fair project and later on in life, whether it be in college, university, or just finding a job in a field that you enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
it definitely opens you up to a lot more experiences. I have many friends who have actually found jobs that have that they have been spotted through science fairs, and myself included. So yeah, it's a great opportunity to experiment and socialize, and even get new ideas from other projects. Since it's it's peer reviewed basically. It's live peer reviewing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kate and I actually have continued to do our science fair project over the summers, and now our mentor is actually our boss, and it's been 4 or 5 years now that we've been working on this project, so it's been a fantastic experience.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what kinds of science fairs are available to students? Like, what levels of science fairs are there?
There are definitely many, many levels of science fairs. I remember I started science fair in grade 2, and I was just a kid, and I had this project about a beehive and its structure and everything. And yeah, there's many regional science fairs. There's local science fairs like schools. There's the National Science Fair, of course, the CWSF, and there's even international science fairs like Intel and the Google Science Fair, which are gigantic and worldwide. So yeah, many many levels.
I know there are opportunities outside of a science fair that you can get to through doing science fairs. For example, I was a participant in the Taiwan International Science Fair, which was only available to me because I participated in the Canadian fairs and because I was active in that. So I got to travel to Taiwan for 2 weeks, and I stayed with the host family. And I got to network over there and share a lot of my experience with students from over 23 countries.
I mean, there's so many opportunities. You don't even have to. They're not always, competitions, right? There's that international fair, which is just I don't remember exactly where it is, but it was in Bratislava one year, and it was really not competition based. But yeah, there's.
Oh,
It's
that's
not
the
always about
UNESCO one.
Yeah.
UNESCO has one, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, through Science Fair, actually, I came across an organization called Students on Ice. It's basically like an educational expedition. They do 2 a year, one to the Arctic and one to Antarctica. And this last December, I got to join them on an expedition to Antarctica, and I found out about it like through my friends at Canada-wide Science Fair who had, done their expeditions, and this was by far one of the coolest experiences of my life. Through Science Fair this past summer, I also joined students from all over the world at the International Student Energy Summit, where I got to work with some world leaders about energy issues that we're facing. That was very cool too.
Okay, so I think we've talked a lot about the benefits of science fairs, and now if we want to get started, how do you find an idea?
One of the biggest things when it comes to finding your idea is definitely choosing a field that you really love working with. It's always great to work on a project. First of all, a science fair being outside of the school curriculum and being outside of a school setting, you can do anything you want. Whereas in the school setting, some of the reasons why students might not consider science fair just because a teacher might be giving them a specific project. Whereas with science fair, you can really choose something that you and go forward with it. So if I were to split it up into 4 categories, the first would be definitely observation. So really, to find your idea, all you have to do is look around you. Science is definitely everywhere, whether it be environmental science, chemistry, physics, even mathematics is all around us. And then you have to reflect on that idea. So after observing something and kind of wanting to figure out why it works that way, or try to figure out even a way of improving something, you just kind of have to reflect on how you can do it and if it's something that's feasible. It's also really important to take risks. Coming up with a hypothesis, you don't necessarily want to find something that you know the answer to right away. That's not really an inquisitive project. Like, you really want to try to find something that, yes, it's risky, you don't know what's going to happen, but that's what's great about science fair. Also, networking, again, is a huge thing, just like as we did talk about at the science fair itself. You can actually meet a lot of new people.
Any other ideas on?
I'll add to that. When you don't always have to look for a project, but the important or an idea, but it's always you be on the lookout for something. Like you might be just walking down the street and see something, and then you just note it down and write it down and remember it. It's you don't always find the idea itself, but that idea itself brings you to something else. It's always like a circle of life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think like what's on the news, like what's going on in society that you think you could make a difference with or you really care about. For instance, we always hear things about climate change or health-related issues, so that's always a great way to get an idea that will be really impactful.
I know for me, I worked on heating systems for a lot of my projects, and I never would have really thought of it, except for one day I realized I was kind of just cold all the time, and obviously my heating wasn't working like it should have been, because people shouldn't have to be cold, and it is Canada, so I just decided to get into work with geothermal, and I researched that, and I looked into how I could make my own system, which was really where I started from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when Kate and I first started our project together, it was a newspaper article that we had read about what was it, Kate? Sorry.
There was a leak into a river,
Yes.
and basically it inspired us to start studying landfill liners.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then
And as you can see on the screen here, the Idea Springboard is actually something powered by Google Science Fair. So it's using all of Google's power, as well as plenty of different resources. So it's basically a searching tool that's going to help you find something that you love doing for your science fair. So it's cut into 3 different categories. So for example, if you love cooking, you'd write that in there. Then there's a drop-down box of different things you're good at. So those are all the different fields. There's chemistry, mathematics, physics, biology, and so on and so forth. So for this one, as an example, I just chose chemistry. And then there's something that you want to try to explore. So for here, for example, with the air quality example, these 3 fields might seem something that have not much in common. Like, yes, cooking and chemistry do make sense, but for example, air quality might not be the first thing you'd think of. But then if you type that into the Idea Springboard, it'll actually come up with kind of like a Pinterest sort of look and feel of different ideas that you can have. So they're all a bunch of resources, mostly peer-reviewed. So as you can see here, there's websites, there's even YouTube videos, and even just definitions. That will really help you figure out what you want to do and just give you ideas, not giving you the project itself, but giving you that kind of spark to start inquiring about what you want to do.
So we have a question that just came in. It says, I have a topic, but I can't find a hypothesis. What is your take on that?
I mean, we're going to speak about it a bit later. It's really about the research, right? Since you have a topic, you have a general idea of what you want to look for, right?
Mm-hmm.
But since you want a hypothesis or, first finding a question for to find a hypothesis, just do research on your project, on your topic. Just keep reading up on it. Keep up with the news on it, and eventually something will show itself up, right? So don't worry, just keep reading on it, keep learning new stuff about it, and yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, like Farouk said, the hypothesis is what you think will happen. So I guess if you're planning to set up an experiment, maybe think about how you're conducting it and what some of the things that could happen are, like if it works or if it doesn't work, and then what that would mean for your results.
And as you continue to research, you sort of become an expert really on your field because you learn all these new things about it, and it just gets easier as you continue with your research and as you continue to find new things.
Mm-hmm.
So on that topic, what do you guys think makes a really good idea for a science fair project? Like, what qualities does an idea have to be applied in a science fair?
A good science fair project has something that, first of all, has a variable that can be controlled, so something that you have complete control over. So if, for example, you have a project that you're just changing a bunch of different things and you're not really considering one specific thing, then it's kind of really hard to pinpoint what the results will be. So definitely, first of all, something that you can control, whether it be in a lab or just at home or even like out on the field. And then another big thing is also having, opposed to that, is having things you can change, so different variables as well.
An idea doesn't have to be the most, innovative thing you can ever imagine. You don't have to invent something crazy. It can be just taking something that already exists and, putting your own spin to it, right? You don't have to. It doesn't have to be extremely complex, right? It can be really a simple idea that no one's maybe thought of before, and that's science in general. That's research in general. You don't always have to look for the big things. You can't always cure disease and etc. So keep it simple. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Building off of that, also find something that you're interested in. Something that you're passionate about. An area where, in a way, like, you want to make a difference. Like, how does your project apply to the world is a good way to think about, if your idea is, like, good or not, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely feel like the best ideas are usually really relevant. But like Farouk was saying, it doesn't have to be something super complex either. So like you don't have to fix climate change. But I think a good project might have like some way to tie that in, like how this would relate to climate change or like whatever you're interested in.
All right, so assume you've got your idea down pat and you kind of have an idea of how you're going to go about looking into it. How do you start your project and where do you get the resources to start and to know where to go from there?
I feel like when people think of the word resources, they kind of just assume that it means like a book or the internet or anything like that. And we don't often think that a resource can actually be a person or a group of people or even someone that's conducted a similar experiment that you actually want to improve on. So one of the first things that I definitely think that's a step to getting started with your project is definitely asking people that are in the field, asking them questions that you might not necessarily have information online or in books.
Yeah, so just as Emily said, there are tons of resources all around you. It can be your parents, even teachers, professors, university students. A good way to find books or something would be visiting like a public library, your university library. And I know that one of the resources that I really liked when I was trying to find background information or just articles and journals was Google Scholar. And then there's also Smarts. Smarts is basically this like social network for youth and where you can get in contact with alumni like us and ask for advice or tips when doing your project.
And to go back to the question that was asked earlier, he has a topic, but he doesn't have a specific subject. You can the resources, the people that you ask, can maybe guide you to find something that you can use, right? So yeah, always ask questions. Always.
Yeah, I would say definitely don't be afraid to just ask for support because you never know what people are going to say. I mean, when we were doing our project about landfill liners, we emailed a guy that works in Calgary making landfills. And we're like, can we have some samples of like your liners to test for our project? He's like, sure. And he just like shipped us a box of like these tiny little landfill things. So, I mean, you never know. And then we just set this up in our high school. We're like, can we have this bench space? And they're like, sure. So,
yeah. So always ask. It never hurts to ask.
And on that note, just because maybe you don't have a university or college or something like that in your hometown, it doesn't mean that you don't have access to it because so many professors and people in the research industry, they're very, very welcome to helping out students, especially in the sciences. So even if you're not right at the university with them, you can still email them and ask if they know anything or if they can guide you any way. and that kind of open dialogue and communication is great.
Hmm.
So we just got a question. The question is, do I need to have a mentor?
No, you don't need to have a mentor. They can be useful. So for my first project with Kate, we didn't have one. We had an idea. We knew what we wanted to do, and of course, we used like resources all around us for information and stuff. It did make it a little bit trickier. If your project is more complex, you may need a mentor. But yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, go ahead, Kate.
It depends a lot on what you want to do, right? Like after this project we keep talking about, we did 2 more projects that we did have a mentor for, and so we were working in his lab, but like we needed those resources because we were testing water samples for parasites, and there was no way we could just do that by ourselves. But if it's something that you think you can conduct by yourself, then I don't see why you would need one.
No, like using myself as an example, like not to say mentors are good or bad, but the year that I didn't have a mentor was actually one of the years that I was the most successful. So not saying that that's like not to contradict mentors or say they're bad or anything like that, but definitely you can be successful without one just as you can with one.
That's true. I've definitely had mentors, and I've had projects without mentors, and there's advantages to having mentors, like they might have past experience that you can tap into, but one advantage of maybe not having a mentor is that it sort of pushes you to do a lot more of your own research, and it pushes you to really look into your topic. And from the learning side of things, you really do learn a lot more just because you're driving yourself.
Maybe we should clarify the difference between a mentor and a person of just resource, somebody you ask questions to. I've never had a mentor, so I wouldn't really know. So, can you maybe answer that?
For me, at least, the person I considered a mentor was at the time a professional engineer who worked in heating and cooling. And he didn't actually have any experience in what I was doing because it was new, but he was a professional. He'd worked in systems in residential and commercial, and so he was able to guide me on a lot of the really logistic stuff. Whereas there are people who I've asked questions to, just teachers, and they kind of help me with scientific process, but they're not professionals in the industry. So that's where my line was kind of drawn with that.
Okay.
I also think a mentor guides you throughout your entire project, whereas like a resource might just help you like at one point or like a few things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with the assistance and working with our mentor, we learned how to work in a lab, how to use equipment properly, how to find resources, like what makes a good resource, things like that.
I should also mention that having a mentor doesn't necessarily mean that they will have all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
They might be able to help you in a lot of ways, but they might not have experience with everything. So even if you do have a mentor, it doesn't mean you have a free ride or anything. You'll still have to put in a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I guess once you are starting your project, what are sort of the cycles or the lifeline of a science fair? How does it start and how does it develop?
Well, I think once you've thought of your idea, you're going to need a plan for how to test it, right? So you're going to go through a process of probably doing some troubleshooting. So you might set up your experiment and find that it's not really working the way you thought it would, or there might be a better way of testing your hypothesis. So you would modify the experiment and then go from there.
So what are the parts of a science fair, or science fair project, I should say?
So you need to do your background research, and then that will give you a hypothesis, like what you think is going to happen based on what you've learned. And then you need to set up the experiment itself and what I wanted to do was use the landfill project again as an example for maybe how to set up an easy experiment if you weren't sure how to do this. So basically, you're going to need variables. So you'll want to change one thing and keep the other things constant so you can compare them. I guess what we did, since we had different landfill liners, is we kept all the other conditions the same. So we had like a little plastic container and we cut off the bottom, and then we would like put on the liner, and then we had like the same amount of soil and the same pH of the liquid we were pouring on top of the liners, and then so you need a variable that you're going to test, right? So we had a little dish of water underneath each of the landfill liners, and we would test the pH when it was leaking, or like, I guess even if it hadn't leaked, and then we would compare the pH for all of them. And then I think another thing you need to consider when you're setting up your experiment is having a control. So what we did is we had one where there was no liner, and we also had another run where we would just add water, so we didn't have any strong acid coming into contact with the liner. And then I think one other important thing to consider is having an appropriate number of replicates. So if you were to test something once, you'll probably be asked at the science fair, like, would you see this again? So you might want to have like maybe like 3 or 5 of the same thing to see if it keeps happening consistently. Yeah, and then once you've got all these results, you're going to want to analyze them. So a good way to do this might be to like make a graph, or I guess it depends on what you're looking at, but you could graph the pHs of these different systems to compare them and draw conclusions from there.
Another really important part of doing a science fair project specifically is that you do need to keep a logbook of everything you do. And if you participate in a science fair, it will likely be part of your judging scheme to have that logbook there. So just make sure that you keep a record of everything you tried, everything you did, all your observations, and maybe photos and data as well in the logbook. But it's really important to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, judges really like to see that, a logbook, because it shows that, you know, you put work into it, and they like to see like every step that you've done, you know, throughout your project.
And even just keeping a book of your research as well is also a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
They say that the difference between messing around and science is actually writing it down. So, yeah, yeah. I also would like to say that you have many different steps, right? But a science fair project doesn't always have to focus on the conclusion and the hypothesis. It can focus on many different aspects, or one big one. Like my projects, they didn't really focus on the experiment part, but more on the analysis of the results. Most people are gonna really try to focus on the experiment part, but you know, that's depending on you and what you want to do. My project never really had really a hypothesis that I needed to find, and I always wanted to do something, but my hypothesis was always like less than a sentence, basically, because it never was really what I looked for. Yeah, so it can focus on many different things. You can make it very different from everybody else, and it'll be very successful too. So, yeah.
So we just had a question come in. It was asking about what happens if you do a project and it fails. I was wondering if you guys had any stories about projects failing before. None? I had some projects fail, and for me, I think that it wasn't really a big deal, because even if you prove, okay, my hypothesis was incorrect, that's still making a conclusion. It's still making observations that, okay, this does not work, and it's still valid scientific experiment. And I think just because maybe your hypothesis was correct or incorrect doesn't necessarily make your work any less important.
Mm-hmm.
So even the failures are very important, and they should be all documented. Don't lie about any of your findings. Don't try to make it look better or worse than it is. But yeah, it's all valid, important stuff.
And I would say that failures aren't really even failing, they're just stepping stones to get you towards the result you're actually looking for. So even if you do even just make a mistake and you realize it after just by documenting it all. Like, for example, for one of my projects, I actually was trying to make a random number generator that was more efficient actually for my project. But originally I had started that as my all-around project, like it was just doing some computer programming kind of thing. And after that, I realized that that was just going to be an aid to my project. That's not even what my hypothesis was at all. So by creating something, you might realize, oh, I can actually do something even better than this, and just use it as a stepping stone to continue on your project.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't have to even be better. It can be something completely different. I have had some projects where I failed miserably trying to do them, but I've always tried to find like the silver lining, and always try to find maybe something else I could use my results for. I mean, I've done dozens and dozens of science fairs, but not all of them were successes. Many of them didn't even work. Yeah. So.
Yeah, my first science fair project was, I guess like something similar happened with that. Me and the person I was working with at the time, we were trying to build this like complicated machine, and it was like we were in grade 7, so I mean we didn't really know what we were doing, and it didn't end up working out too well. But we did realize that we had built the thing pretty much out of used parts, right? And so we put this little spin on it that it was like made completely out of recycled things, and like you could make toys out of that, and like I don't know, I think it turned out pretty well. Even though it wasn't like what we originally intended, it still led us somewhere.
I've always noticed that when you're actually presenting at a science fair, often judges or maybe parents or people just coming to see your work will ask about future work as well. And so I think that's a really good opportunity to say, okay, well, this one didn't work out properly, but based on this data, I think it might work better if I did this, or if I changed this variable, or if I added another control. And that shows that you're actively thinking about how to take your project in another direction if it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a couple more questions coming in. Another one is, how do you do projects on things that you can't really directly work with? So things that are like really large scale, like astronomy or oceanography.
Well, I think if you can't work with it yourself, that might be when you want to look into finding a mentor, like somebody who's involved with the topic that can help you if it's something like you don't even know where to start with.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to include an experiment. Like another big category that they have at Science Fair is actually a study project. So you don't necessarily have to conduct an experiment with actual models or things. You can actually just conduct a study.
Mm. Yeah, our project that Kate and I we did in grades 11 and 12 was a study. We did have components of it which were experiments, but like it was a study that we did.
Yeah, we just went around and we measured parasites throughout the environment, and we put together like a little, I guess, map of like the concentrations, and we just looked at what was out there, and we didn't really end up testing anything, and we found out a lot of really interesting things too.
Yeah, we looked into how well our wastewater treatment plant was removing these parasites. We looked into the levels of them like throughout our city, as well as in like lakes and streams, things like that. So we didn't do a lot of experimentation exactly.
Yeah.
I know there's also a lot of data that's available now, just from things like Google Maps, for example. You can get a lot of information from Google Maps and Google Earth, and a lot of data that can be used and analyzed. Maybe if you don't have a direct hands-on experiment, you can still do the analysis, and there's tons and tons of resources available online to look into these giant kind of projects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, my whole grade 11, 10, 11, 12 projects were about some things I could never have done with my own hands. I could never really go and do biopsies on patients with cancer, right? So what I did was I actually looked online and I found databases, and they had thousands upon thousands of cases, right? And I could always use that data of course, after having asked the permission of the scientists that made that database. But there are some things you just can't do as a student, especially in high school, and you have to, accept that and find other ways. Online is always a good idea, but that's where your mentor and resources come in, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, one thing you also want to think about when you're doing a big project is how much time do you have? For example, when Kate and I, we started our second project, we had so many phases that we wanted to explore. So we actually ended up splitting our project on those between those 2 years, because by the end of the first year that we were doing this project, we just had so many more questions, and there were things that we knew that we couldn't do in that school year, and that we decided to save it and do it for the next year.
So we have another question coming in on the Q&A. It's, how do you conduct a study versus a classical experiment?
Well, I guess you have to, think about, well, a study is when you look at something that already exists that maybe there hasn't been a lot of research into, but you want to know more about it, and you're going to look at it without conducting an experiment. So with an experiment, you would set up a bunch of trials where you'd have these variables I was talking about earlier, where you yourself are changing things, and then you look at what happens to draw conclusions from that. And then in a study, you would just take data from what is already existing and analyze it. I think a lot of times for a study to be good, it really needs to be something that nobody else has actually done before. Otherwise, you'd be summarizing research that's present online. So I know a lot of people don't really start out with studies because it's definitely hard to do something that's original. I think it's possible, but you have to be really specific about it. Like what we did is we tested parasites in water samples throughout our city and compared it to data from other cities. And we lived in a small city, so nobody had ever looked at this. Yeah, so I think it has to be something original that nobody's looked into that you want to measure.
I think that while originality is a really good aspect of it, it doesn't always necessarily have to be something breaking edge either, because I know that that's really hard to collect data on. An example of this is that when I did a study project, I looked into an incineration site in Washington where they were disposing of the city's garbage by incineration instead of landfills. And so it's not really necessarily the most original idea, but it was really cool because I could make a site visit and I could listen to their information and compile that. But I could also compare it to tons of data about landfills that were already existing. And yeah, again, not super thrilling and not super original, but it was a really good study because there was a lot of data for it.
Yeah, there's a lot of reading that goes into a study.
Yeah, one thing that hasn't been mentioned, but it applies to everything we've said, is give yourself enough time to do your project. Trust me, you need more than 2 weeks. You need months and months and months.
How long have most of your projects taken?
Mine? Mine were a lot of, the early ones were very, very short, 2 weeks. So they never really were as good as my little ones, which I've decided to do 6 months or 8 months of, just working on it. No, you don't have to work on it nonstop, of course, but especially in long projects whereas mine were more about programming and and health studies, which were really fast to do if I took many all-nighters. But if you have projects that that are studies and for example something generic like observing bacteria, you need a long time to document everything that happens and you need to do it many times. So maybe if something takes a month to do, you might want to do it 3 times, so that takes already 3 months of your time of just observing. So you really need to give yourself sometimes a full year. We're talking about students here, but in the science community, you have 10 people who have worked on one thing for 10, 20 years. So, don't feel let down by that, though. All right? Thanks.
And going back to what Kate and Jasmine said, like with their project, like I also did a project where I kind of split it up into 2 years. So that's definitely something you can do. Like don't be afraid, or don't even be worried if you have tons of unanswered questions. Those are great to go actually into your project and explain to judges, like, after this year I'm going to be continuing this project because these are the questions I still have to answer.
And sometimes sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, November is probably, if you're starting a science fair project, like your first one, November is plenty of time. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get like scared by everybody. There's like a year in advance. Like for my first 3 science fair projects, I started in November. So yeah.
I think my first science fair project in grade 8 was 2 weeks before, which was not the smartest idea, but
Pretty much.
that's what we did.
It also depends on the nature of the project. Sometimes if you're doing maybe an environmental project, you might need seasonal effects. For example, when I was working with my heating systems, I had to work in both the extreme summer conditions and the extreme winter conditions just to see how it would test. That didn't mean that I was, researching for a year straight. It just meant that when summer rolled around, I would take a lot of data, and then, it would kind of go a little bit dormant, and I wouldn't really do a lot in the spring and fall, and then winter would come, and then I'd take a lot of data. So technically it would take a year, but it wasn't hard, steady work all year. It just needed the time.
Exactly. Like when Kate and I, we were taking samples, we wanted to compare the different seasons. So, we did a lot of work outside the lab too. So what we did was we collected sewage from manholes. And so it was great. So, we really wanted to compare what happens in the summer to the winter and how the levels fluctuate. And so yes, it was a year's worth of data, but we weren't working every single day, all day for a year.
And I think it's also important to budget in a little bit of time for things to go wrong. Maybe even a lot of time. Especially if you're gonna grow plants, are those plants gonna die? Because that happened to me with spinach plants so many times. So.
Are we gonna grow fungus in some of our samples for some reason?
We're gonna have to throw out all this moldy stuff. It
happens.
Yeah.
Some of the greatest discoveries in science were total accidents. So, don't worry about, failing something.
And going back to the question about conducting a study, actually another way you can kind of consider it is going back to what we said about failures. So let's say an experiment didn't actually work, you can actually then conduct a study to explain why it might not have worked and what you could actually do to improve it. If you don't have a lot of time, it might be a great way, instead of being oh no, the science fair is in 2 weeks, how am I supposed to redo this entire experiment? Well, you can actually just kind of cheat a little and say, oh, well, it's actually going to be a study.
So just for the sake of time here, I just figured I would ask what a science fair looks like. And also we have another question that says, what can I expect when I present my project at a science fair? So just to summarize, what does a project look like and what can we expect from the presentation of a science fair?
Well, I think once you've got your whole experiment done and there's nothing you want to redo, you'll want to write it into a report, which basically goes in the order of the scientific method, and then you want to have a visual display, which is usually what everybody thinks of when you hear science fair. It's the poster board, right? So you take the sections from your report, and you probably want to. We would usually cut down some of the wording, so it wouldn't be too long, and then we would have different sections on the board for each section of the report, and you would want to include a lot of visuals, so you have graphs and photos, and make it colorful, make it stand out, have an interesting title.
Yeah, I know we have a sort of an idea here, what you can see, title, purpose, abstract, but don't be afraid to make it different. And some of the nicest projects we've seen were projects without words at all, just pictures, right? And the important part of it is not what it looks like. It's more about how you present it. I know my projects were, some of them were the most terrible visuals you'd ever seen. It was basically sheets and papers. That was my grade 10 project. It was basically just, I typed it on Word and printed it and then put it, because I had a problem with my board. So, and I put it on there, and that year was my most successful one. I won gold that year. So it doesn't mean that if something isn't, beautiful or, like the others, it doesn't penalize you in any way.
Hmm.
You definitely don't have to be an artist. I've never been particularly artistic with my projects, but I think the key is that people should be able to look at your board and just kind of get a good idea of what it's about without standing there and reading 20 paragraphs. So how about that other question about what can a student expect when they present their science fair project?
One really big key element that I found in my first year was I was expecting like these big long presentations, like just to talk to judges for about 20 minutes, just about kind of going through all of my research. When really don't really expect to just have to talk, and because that can actually seem like a challenge, just to have to talk about your project for a long period of time. Because when really judges actually will just be asking you a bunch of questions, or even like on the second day of judging or in the afternoon kind of thing. Depending on how long your regional fair runs, or the Canada-wide, like in the afternoon when judges kind of come back around to make their final decisions, they're actually kind of go up to you and be like, hey, can you explain your project in 2 minutes? And then you just kind of stand there like, what? How am I going to do this? So kind of have your actual speech, and then also kind of have something prepared that's only going to last a couple minutes, like just to remember, just to illustrate your key points, and don't be afraid to kind of condense all your project and leave room for questions.
Hmm. Yeah, I found, throughout the years that your presentation really just ends up being more like a conversation. Like if you're presenting to a scientist, or if you're even, presenting to a kid, which you will do at the Canada-wide Science Fair on public viewing days, like, you should just be able to explain at like any level your project, and you should be able to relate to them, and be able to simplify it is what I would recommend.
I think the best part about presenting a science fair project and showing your work is that when it all comes down to it, people are coming to you because they want to talk to you, not because they want to hear you ramble off some long presentation.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if they wanted to know all the information, they could read your board or read your report, but when you're presenting your presentation, it's a lot of just answering questions. People will ask you how far you went, what you found, what you were testing, and sometimes it's okay to not have the answers. That's another thing. You can always, don't be afraid to say, oh, it's out of the scope of my research. Nobody expects you to test everything, but all in all, the presentation is usually a conversation. Definitely.
Yeah. And if you ever get, if a judge asks you a question where you really just don't know the answer to that, again, that's okay. Just say like, that's very interesting. I, will think more about that. Maybe that's something that I can apply to next year when I build on this project. So it's really about the way that you answer these questions.
Yeah, there's many ways of presenting your project as there are people on Earth. So you always have to expect something different. Even I, right now, if I was asked to do a project for the CWSF or anything, I still wouldn't, know exactly what to expect, since people are so different and they want to hear so many different things about your project. It doesn't always have to do with your results or anything, but they always want to learn more about something about your project, and you have to be, you have to have done your research and know what you're talking about. That's the important thing.
Mm-hmm.
And a big question that I think all judges will typically ask is, what are your real-world applications, and what can this actually do to change anything in real life? Because yes, Science Fair project is great because you're testing a lot of things you probably wouldn't normally think about, but it's also really important to make that correlation between something that's real and the experiment that you did.
All right, so I think we are just about finished for our time today. Are there any more questions or comments that we should go through? Any last final words?
Remember, science is fun, so always have fun. That's the most important part about science fairs. If you don't have fun while doing it, it won't be successful, and you won't be happy with yourself. So have fun.
Mm-hmm.
The content of your project is definitely really important, but it's also how you vocalize it and how you present it to the judges and just to really anyone in your community. Sure, the content is really important, but if you get excited about it, people will notice.
Mm-hmm. And remember that winning isn't the main goal. You know, you're there to have fun, and you're there because you have a passion for science. I know that the year that I had, the most incredible experience at Canada Light Science Fair was the year that I didn't get an award, but I made so many friends that I'm still in contact with today, and it was fantastic.
All right. So if there's no more questions or comments, then good luck and have fun.